I thought my 18th birthday would mark the beginning of my adult life filled with college plans and exciting possibilities. Instead, my parents sat me down in our living room and delivered news that shattered everything I believed about my place in our family. They admitted they never saved anything for my college education, because they honestly didn't think I would actually go or amount to much in life. While my younger brother Dylan already possessed a substantial college fund and received a brand new Honda Civic for his 16th birthday, I discovered the painful truth about their complete lack of faith in my potential. The shocking admission occurred during what I expected to be a celebration, immediately revealing years of hidden favoritism. The silence that followed their confession felt heavier than the August humidity that clung to our small Indiana town. I stared at my parents, searching their faces for any sign that this was some cruel joke, but Mom's nervous fidgeting with her wedding ring and Dad's inability to meet my eyes confirmed the devastating reality. "What do you mean you never thought I'd go to college?" I managed to whisper my voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning unit, struggling against the summer heat. Dad cleared his throat the same way he did before delivering bad news about late mortgage payments or broken appliances. "Greta, you've always been more of a dreamer than an achiever. Your grades were decent, but Dylan has that academic drive, that competitive spirit that really matters in the real world." Mom nodded enthusiastically, as if she'd been waiting years to voice these thoughts. "Dylan made honor roll every semester since middle school. He plays varsity football, leads the debate team, and already has colleges recruiting him. You spend your time drawing pictures and writing stories that don't really translate to practical career skills." The comparison hit me like a physical blow. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up working on art projects, pouring my heart into creative writing assignments that earned praise from teachers, but apparently meant nothing to my own family. Meanwhile, Dylan received tutoring for subjects he struggled with, expensive equipment for every sport he wanted to try, and constant encouragement for his achievements. "But Dylan already has everything planned out." I protested, thinking of the college brochures that constantly arrived, addressed to him, the proud conversations my parents had with neighbors about his scholarship prospects, and the way they beamed whenever discussing his future. "Exactly," Dad said, leaning forward with the enthusiasm he usually reserved for discussing home improvement projects. "We invested in his education because we knew it would pay off. He's got a full ride to State University through academic merit and football scholarships. Plus, we've been adding to his college fund since he was born, so he'll graduate debt-free with money left over for graduate school if he chooses." The room started spinning as the full scope of their favoritism became clear. While Dylan received private tutoring in mathematics and science, I'd struggled through those same subjects alone, asking for help, only to be told I should figure things out myself because it would build character. When Dylan wanted to attend expensive sports camps, they found the money immediately. When I asked for art supplies or writing workshops, they suggested I use free materials from school and practice on my own time. "What about Grandma Rose's money?" I asked, remembering the hushed conversations I'd overheard about an inheritance after my grandmother passed away 2 years earlier. Mom and Dad exchanged a look that made my stomach drop. It was the same expression they wore when they thought Dylan and I weren't listening to their arguments about finances. "Your grandmother left money for both of you." Mom admitted slowly, her voice taking on a defensive tone. "But we made the responsible decision to allocate those funds where they would have the most impact. Dylan's going to be a doctor or a lawyer, professions that require extensive education and significant investment. We couldn't risk dividing the money and leaving him short of what he needs for medical school applications and LSAT preparation courses." "So you gave him my inheritance too." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I was past caring about maintaining family harmony. Dad's face reddened, a sure sign that he was about to lose his temper. "We made a strategic family investment decision. Dylan represents our best chance at having someone in this family achieve real financial success and social status. Sometimes parents have to make tough choices about resource allocation." That's when it happened. During our heated exchange, Mom became flustered and said something she clearly hadn't intended to reveal. Besides, your grandmother specifically wanted both children to have equal opportunities for education, but we decided you were too much of a risk for that kind of investment. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the antique clock that Grandma Rose had left us. Dad shot Mom a warning look that spoke volumes about conversations they'd had behind closed doors. What did Grandma Rose actually say about the money? I pressed, sensing there was more to this story than they were revealing. Mom's nervous energy escalated as she realized her mistake. She began organizing magazines that were already perfectly arranged on the coffee table, avoiding eye contact, while Dad sat rigid in his leather recliner. She left detailed instructions, Mom finally admitted. She wanted both grandchildren to have equal chances at higher education. She even wrote letters to each of you expressing her hopes for your futures. "Where's my letter?" I demanded. Another exchange look between my parents confirmed what I was beginning to suspect. There were documents, instructions, and probably evidence of just how extensively they had violated my grandmother's wishes. That evening, after my parents went to bed, I found myself drawn to Dad's home office like a detective following a crucial lead. The room smelled of old leather and coffee filled with filing cabinets containing years of business records from his small hardware store. I knew I was crossing a line, but the desperate need for truth outweighed my respect for privacy boundaries. The desk drawers were locked, but I remembered seeing Dad hide the spare key behind his collection of vintage tools displayed on floating shelves. My hands trembled as I opened the bottom drawer, revealing folders labeled with various family financial categories. There in a manila envelope marked estate documents, I found my grandmother's original will and the letter she had written specifically for me. As I read her words by the dim light of the desk lamp, tears blurred my vision. Grandma Rose had described my artistic talents as remarkable gifts that will touch many lives and expressed particular excitement about supporting my creative education. She had specifically requested that I receive encouragement to pursue art school or creative writing programs, understanding that my path might look different from traditional academic routes, but believing it was equally valuable. The will clearly stated that the inheritance should be divided equally between both grandchildren with individual letters explaining her hopes for each of our futures. She had even included a provision that if either child showed exceptional talent in their chosen field, additional funds should be made available to support that passion. My hands shook as I realized the full extent of my parents' betrayal. They hadn't just failed to save for my education or chosen to favor Dylan. They had actively stolen my inheritance, violated my grandmother's explicit wishes, and kept me from receiving her final message of love and support. The woman who had always encouraged my creativity and praised my imagination had tried to ensure I would have the resources to pursue my dreams, but my own parents had decided I wasn't worth the investment. The next morning, I woke up with a determination I'd never felt before. If my parents wouldn't invest in my future, I would create my own opportunities through sheer force of will and relentless effort. The local coffee shop, Brewster's Corner, had a help wanted sign in their window for weeks, and I walked in that day to apply for my first real job. The manager, a woman named Sarah in her 30s with purple streaked hair and multiple ear piercings, looked over my hastily written application with genuine interest. "So you're starting senior year next month planning for college?" "Working on it," I replied, not ready to share the complex family drama that had brought me to this point. Sarah nodded approvingly. "I like the honesty. Most kids your age act like they've got everything figured out. Can you start tomorrow morning? We open at 5:30, and the early shift pays an extra $1 per hour." Within a week, I had established a routine that would define my entire senior year. I worked the opening shift at Brewster's Corner from 5:30 to 8 in the morning, attended school all day, then returned to the coffee shop for the evening rush from 4 to 8 at night. The work was demanding, but I discovered an unexpected talent for remembering complex drink orders and connecting with regular customers who appreciated my genuine enthusiasm for their daily caffeine rituals. My second job came through a recommendation from Mrs. Patterson, my high school art teacher, who mentioned that several families in our neighborhood needed tutoring help for their younger children. Soon I was spending 3 evenings per week helping elementary students with homework and reading comprehension. Earning $15 per hour, that felt like a fortune compared to my minimum wage coffee shop earnings. The academic awakening began when I realized that teaching younger kids required me to truly understand subjects I had previously struggled with myself. Explaining fractions to a confused third grader forced me to master mathematical concepts in ways that benefited my own learning. Reading aloud with children who were developing their literacy skills reminded me why I loved storytelling and creative expression. Most importantly, I threw myself into scholarship applications with the intensity of someone whose future depended on external validation and financial support. I researched obscure grants, local business sponsorships, and national competitions that rewarded academic achievement, community service, or artistic talent. My school guidance counselor, Mr. Rodriguez, stayed after hours twice a week to help me navigate application processes and polish my essays. "Greta, your writing samples are exceptional," he told me during one of our sessions. "There's a vulnerability and authenticity in your personal statements that really stands out from typical scholarship applications. Admissions committees are going to remember your voice." The applications became my obsession. I wrote essays about overcoming financial hardship, discovering my passion for visual arts, and my commitment to using education as a tool for social change. I documented my work experience, volunteer hours at the local animal shelter, and leadership roles in the school's literary magazine and art club. 3 months into my senior year, responses started arriving. The first acceptance letter came from a regional scholarship program that awarded $5,000 to students pursuing creative fields. I was sitting in the Brewster's Corner break room during my dinner break when I opened the envelope and my hands started shaking so violently that Sarah came over to check if I was having some kind of medical emergency. "I got a scholarship," I whispered, staring at the congratulatory letter that seemed too good to be true. Sarah read over my shoulder and let out a whoop that startled customers at the front counter. $5,000, Greta, this is incredible. You're going to college." More acceptances followed over the next several weeks. A local business association awarded me a $1,000 scholarship for academic achievement combined with work ethic. The State Arts Council selected me for a merit-based grant worth $3,000. Most significantly, a national foundation that supported first-generation college students offered me a renewable scholarship worth $8,000 per year, specifically designed for students whose families had no history of higher education support. I was practically floating with excitement and relief. The combined scholarships would cover tuition at several excellent state schools, and with my savings from working 2 jobs, I could afford housing and living expenses. For the first time since my disastrous birthday conversation, I felt confident about my future and proud of what I had accomplished through my own determination. That's when I discovered my parents' sabotage. I came home from school one afternoon to find Dad standing in the kitchen with several opened envelopes in his hands. His expression was thunderous, and I immediately knew something was wrong. "We need to discuss these scholarship letters," he said, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he used when lecturing Dylan and me about household rules or academic expectations. "What scholarship letters?" I asked, though my stomach was already sinking with dread. Dad spread the envelopes across the kitchen counter, and I realized with growing horror that they were addressed to me, but had clearly been opened and read. The Art Institute Scholarship, the Creative Writing Foundation grant, and something called the Future Leaders Program. I've already contacted these organizations to decline on your behalf. The words hit me like a physical assault. You did what... Greta, accepting charity money from these organizations would be embarrassing for our family. Mom chimed in from the living room where she had apparently been listening to our conversation. People would think we can't provide for our own children, and Dad's business reputation in this community depends on maintaining a certain image of financial stability and family success. I stared at the declined scholarship letters calculating the financial impact of their interference. The Art Institute scholarship alone was worth $12,000, specifically designed for students who showed exceptional promise in visual arts and creative writing. The Future Leaders program was a full-ride opportunity that included mentorship, internship placements, and graduate school preparation. Those scholarships were worth over $30,000. I said, my voice rising despite my attempts to stay calm. How could you reject them without even telling me they arrived? Dad's face reddened with the same anger he displayed whenever anyone questioned his decision-making authority. Because we know what's best for this family's reputation and your realistic future prospects. These pie-in-the-sky art programs are just going to fill your head with unrealistic expectations about making a living through creative hobbies. You need practical skills, a reliable career path, something that will actually pay the bills in the real world. But they're full scholarships, I protested. Free education at excellent schools with programs specifically designed for students like me. Mom appeared in the kitchen doorway, wringing her hands in the nervous gesture that meant she was about to deliver more devastating news. We've already made arrangements for you to work full-time at Dad's hardware store after graduation. He's willing to give you a management position within a few years, and you can take some business courses at the community college if you really want additional education. It's a much more sensible plan than chasing artistic dreams that probably won't lead anywhere financially viable. The realization that they had been actively sabotaging my chances for success while maintaining their narrative about my lack of potential felt like drowning in betrayal. They hadn't just failed to support my education, they had deliberately intercepted opportunities, rejected scholarships on my behalf, and created a predetermined path that would keep me financially dependent on their hardware store business. "How long have you been intercepting my mail?" I demanded. The guilty expressions on both their faces provided the answer before Dad spoke. "We've been monitoring your correspondence since you started this scholarship obsession. Parents have a responsibility to guide their children toward realistic goals and protect them from disappointment when unrealistic dreams don't work out as planned." I thought about all the applications I had submitted, wondering how many acceptance letters had never reached me, how many opportunities had been stolen before I even knew they existed. The betrayal felt deeper and more systematic than I had imagined possible from people who claimed to love me. That night, I called Mr. Rodriguez from my bedroom, speaking in whispers to avoid alerting my parents to the conversation. "They declined the scholarships without telling you." His voice carried the same shock and anger I was feeling. "Greta, that's not just inappropriate parental guidance. What they did might actually be illegal, depending on how the scholarship organizations handle application processes and recipient communications." "What can I do?" I asked. "Is there any way to reverse their decisions or reapply for programs they rejected?" Mr. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear him typing on his computer keyboard. "Let me make some phone calls tomorrow. Some of these programs have policies for situations involving family interference or communication disruptions. The Art Institute scholarship in particular has had issues with parents sabotaging their children's applications, so they might have procedures for addressing this kind of situation." For the first time since discovering my parents' betrayal, I felt a flicker of hope that there might be ways to salvage my educational opportunities, despite their systematic interference. Mr. Rodriguez's phone calls led to something I never expected: a network of educators who had encountered similar family situations and developed informal systems for helping students navigate parental sabotage of their educational aspirations. Within a week of our conversation, I found myself in Mrs. Patterson's art classroom after school, surrounded by 4 teachers who had volunteered their time to help me rebuild my college prospects. "This happens more often than people realize," explained Mrs. Chen, the librarian who specialized in research and database access. "Families sometimes interfere with their children's educational opportunities for various reasons, ranging from financial control to cultural expectations to simple misunderstanding of academic processes." Mrs. Patterson had prepared folders containing information about delayed admission programs, gap year opportunities, and scholarship deadlines that extended into the spring semester. Many excellent programs have rolling admissions or accept applications for the following academic year. We're going to help you create a comprehensive strategy that your parents can't interfere with. The teachers had developed what they jokingly called an underground railroad for students facing family educational sabotage. Mrs. Johnson, my English teacher, had arranged for all my application materials to be sent to her home address. Mr. Thompson, who taught social studies and coached the debate team, offered to serve as a character reference who could speak to admissions committees about family circumstances that might affect traditional application processes. The first step is documenting everything, Mrs. Chen explained, pulling out a notebook filled with official forms and legal terminology. We need records of the intercepted mail copies of the declined scholarship letters and evidence of your academic achievements that your parents have minimized or dismissed. Over the next several weeks, I spent every afternoon after my coffee shop shift in Mrs. Patterson's classroom, working with this dedicated group of educators who believed in my potential when my own family refused to support my aspirations. They helped me research programs specifically designed for students from unsupportive family backgrounds, including colleges with comprehensive financial aid packages for students who qualified as financially independent. Mrs. Johnson was particularly helpful with essay writing, guiding me through personal statements that honestly addressed my family circumstances without sounding like complaints or excuses. Admissions committees appreciate authenticity, she explained as we worked on my application to the State University's honors program. Your experiences with family financial challenges and educational sabotage actually demonstrate resilience, self-motivation, and maturity that many traditional applicants lack. The breakthrough came when Mrs. Patterson discovered something that would completely change my understanding of my parents' motivations. She'd been researching local scholarship opportunities when she noticed several phone calls from my father to various educational organizations, not just declining opportunities on my behalf, but actively requesting that they remove me from consideration for future programs. Greta, I think we need to involve someone with legal expertise, Mrs. Patterson said during one of our afternoon sessions. What your father has been doing goes beyond poor parental judgment. He's been contacting organizations to ensure you won't receive educational opportunities, which might constitute interference with your legal rights as an adult. Mrs. Chen had been recording our sessions to keep detailed notes about my situation, with my permission, thinking the documentation might be helpful for college applications that asked about special circumstances. But during our conversation about my father's phone calls, she revealed something that made my blood run cold. I should probably mention that your father called the school district office last month, she said hesitantly. He spoke with the superintendent about limiting your access to college preparation resources, claiming that teachers were giving you unrealistic expectations about higher education that were causing family stress. The room fell silent as the full implications became clear. My father hadn't just been intercepting my mail and declining scholarships. He had been actively working to prevent educators from encouraging my academic pursuits, trying to isolate me from the very support system that believed in my capabilities. What exactly did he say to the superintendent? I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. Mrs. Chen consulted her notes, clearly uncomfortable with sharing what she had learned. He requested that teachers stop encouraging you to pursue academic goals beyond your realistic capabilities. He specifically mentioned concerns about your mental health and family finances, suggesting that college preparation was creating unrealistic expectations that were harmful to your emotional well-being. Mrs. Patterson's face showed the same anger I was feeling. So he's been trying to convince school administrators that encouraging your education would be damaging to your psychological health. He also mentioned that the family has already made arrangements for your post-graduation employment and that continued academic encouragement was interfering with those plans, Mrs. Chen added reluctantly. The revelation that my father had been working systematically to undermine not just my opportunities, but also my relationships with supportive educators felt like discovering a conspiracy designed specifically to limit my life possibilities. He wasn't just favoring Dylan or making poor financial decisions. He was actively campaigning to ensure that I would remain dependent on the family business and never develop the confidence or resources to pursue independent goals. Mrs. Johnson leaned forward, her expression serious and determined. "Greta, what we're describing is a pattern of educational abuse. Your father is using his parental authority to deliberately limit your access to opportunities and support systems. This isn't just favoritism or poor judgment anymore." The good news, Mrs. Patterson added, is that we have documentation of his interference, and there are legal protections for students whose families attempt to sabotage their educational rights. More importantly, we have evidence that contradicts his claims about your academic capabilities and mental health. Mrs. Chen opened her laptop and showed me a folder containing months of documentation. "We've been keeping detailed records of your academic performance, work ethic, and emotional stability throughout this process. Your grades have actually improved. Despite the family stress, your work references from both jobs are exceptional, and your creative portfolio demonstrates significant talent and technical skill development." The teachers had unknowingly been building a case that could counter my father's narrative about my limitations and emotional instability. They had documentation of my academic achievements, evidence of my responsible work ethic, and records of my positive interactions with educators and peers. "What happens next?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the scope of what they had discovered and documented. Mrs. Patterson smiled for the first time during our serious conversation. "Next, we contact some organizations that specifically help students in situations like yours. There are legal aid services, educational advocacy groups, and scholarship programs designed for students whose families have interfered with their academic opportunities. You're not going to face this alone anymore." That evening, I walked home from school with a mixture of gratitude for my teacher's support and horror at the extent of my father's sabotage efforts. I had always known my parents favored Dylan, but I was beginning to understand that their treatment of me went far beyond simple favoritism into deliberate suppression of my potential for independence and success. 3 weeks later, I was organizing inventory in the back room of Brewster's Corner when Dylan appeared at the employee entrance, looking more serious than I had ever seen him. At 16, my brother usually carried himself with the confident swagger of someone who knew he was the family's golden child, but today he seemed nervous and almost guilty. "Can we talk?" he asked, glancing around to make sure we were alone. I continued stacking coffee bean bags, not ready to have a friendly conversation with someone who had benefited from all the opportunities that had been denied to me. "If you're here to defend Mom and Dad, I'm not interested." "I'm not here to defend anyone," Dylan said quietly. "I'm here because I can't live with what's happening anymore." Something in his tone made me stop working and actually look at him. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and he had dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "What do you mean?" I asked. Dylan sat down on a crate of paper cups, running his hands through his hair in a gesture that reminded me of Dad when he was stressed about business finances. "I never wanted all this special treatment, Greta. I never asked for the car or the college fund or any of it. I just wanted to be a normal kid without all the pressure and expectations." I stared at my brother, trying to process what he was saying. "You're complaining about having college paid for and getting a car for your birthday." "I'm not complaining about the money," Dylan said quickly. "I'm talking about the guilt. Do you know what it's like to watch your sister work 2 jobs while you get handed everything you could ever want? Do you think I don't notice that you're exhausted all the time while I get driven to school in a car that could have paid for your entire college education?" His words caught me completely off guard. I had assumed Dylan was either oblivious to the family favoritism or actively enjoying his privileged position. The possibility that he felt guilty about the disparity had never occurred to me. "If you feel so bad about it, why haven't you said anything to Mom and Dad?" I asked. Dylan's laugh was bitter and humorless. "I have been saying things. I've been arguing with them for months about the way they treat you. That's why I know about stuff you probably don't even realize is happening." "What kind of stuff?" Dylan looked around again, making sure we weren't being overheard, then pulled out his phone. "I've been recording their conversations about you since this summer. I thought maybe if I had evidence of what they were really saying, I could convince them to change their behavior, or at least make them realize how unfair they were being." He showed me a list of audio files on his phone, each labeled with dates and brief descriptions like "discussion about scholarship interference" and "planning to limit Greta's work opportunities." "You've been recording them?" I asked, shocked by the implications of what he was revealing. "At first, I was just trying to understand why they treated us so differently," Dylan explained. "I thought maybe there was some family history or financial situation I didn't know about that explained their decisions. But the more I listened, the more I realized that their motivations were much darker than simple favoritism." Dylan played the first recording, and I heard my parents' voices with startling clarity. They were discussing my scholarship applications, and their tone was cold and calculating in a way that made my stomach turn. "She's getting too independent," Dad's voice said through the phone speaker. "These teachers are filling her head with ideas about art school and creative careers that will take her away from the family business plan we've developed." "I'm worried she'll actually succeed at something and then she'll think she doesn't need us anymore," Mom's voice replied. "Dylan will always come back to help with the store because he understands family responsibility, but Greta has always been too selfish and dreamy to prioritize family loyalty." Dylan paused the recording and looked at me with an expression of genuine pain. "There are hours of conversations like this, Greta. They're not just favoring me because they think I'm smarter or more capable. They're actively sabotaging you because they're afraid you'll become successful and independent." I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. "What else did they say?" Dylan scrolled through his recordings and selected another file. "This one is from last week after you got that job tutoring the neighbor kids." My parents' voices filled the small break room again, discussing my tutoring work with the same calculating tone. "She's making too much money from these side jobs," Dad said. "If she keeps earning at this rate, she'll have enough saved to move out after graduation, and we'll lose our leverage for keeping her involved in the family business." "Maybe we should talk to those families about ending the tutoring arrangement," Mom suggested. "We could tell them that Greta's work schedule is interfering with her high school responsibilities." "Better idea," Dad replied. "I'll spread the word around town that she's unreliable or has some behavioral issues that make her unsuitable for child care responsibilities. That way, it looks like the families made their own decision to find other tutors." The recording ended, and Dylan and I sat in stunned silence. I had known my parents were unsupportive, but hearing them actively plot to undermine my employment opportunities felt like discovering that strangers were living in my house, wearing my parents' faces. "There's more," Dylan said softly. "Much more. They've been planning this for years, Greta. They see me as the family investment and you as a potential threat to their control over both of us." He showed me another recording from earlier in the summer where my parents discussed their long-term strategy for managing both of their children's futures. "The key is keeping them both dependent on us for different reasons." Dad's voice explained with the same tone he used for business planning. "Dylan stays loyal because of gratitude and family expectations. Greta stays manageable because of financial necessity and limited alternatives." Mom agreed enthusiastically. "And if we can prevent her from developing too much confidence or too many outside connections, she'll never realize that she has other options besides working for the family business." I felt sick listening to my parents discuss me like I was a business asset that needed to be managed, rather than their daughter who deserved love and support. The systematic nature of their plan to limit my opportunities wasn't just favoritism or poor judgment. It was a deliberate strategy designed to ensure my lifelong dependence on their approval and financial support. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked Dylan, though I was grateful for the evidence even as it horrified me. "Because I can't live with being part of this anymore," Dylan said firmly. "I don't want the college fund or the car if it means you get treated like some kind of threat that needs to be controlled and suppressed. This isn't the kind of family I want to be part of, and it's not the kind of person I want to become. Dylan revealed that he had been documenting their parents' conversations for months, initially out of curiosity about the family dynamics, but increasingly out of concern for what he was learning about their deliberate sabotage of my opportunities. "There's something else," Dylan said hesitantly. "Something about Grandma Rose's will that's even worse than what you probably already know." He scrolled to a recording from shortly after my 18th birthday, and I heard my parents discussing the inheritance with a level of detail that revealed just how extensively they had violated our grandmother's wishes. The will specifically said equal distribution. Mom's voice reminded Dad. Rose even included instructions about encouraging Greta's artistic talents and supporting whatever educational path she chose to pursue. "Which is exactly why we couldn't follow those instructions," Dad replied matter-of-factly. "Rose never understood that artistic encouragement would just set Greta up for disappointment and financial instability. We made the responsible choice to redirect that money toward Dylan's education, which will actually benefit the entire family's long-term financial security." The casual way they discussed stealing my inheritance while explicitly acknowledging that they were violating Grandma Rose's specific instructions felt like the final piece of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to solve. They knew exactly what they were doing, understood that it was wrong, and had decided that their control over my future was more important than honoring their mother's dying wishes or treating their own daughter with basic fairness. "I'm going to help you fight this," Dylan said, his voice carrying a determination I had never heard from him before. "I don't want money that was stolen from you, and I don't want to be part of a family that thinks this kind of manipulation and control is acceptable." Armed with Dylan's recordings and my teacher's documentation, I found myself sitting in a small legal aid office 3 towns over speaking with an attorney who specialized in family financial disputes and educational rights. Attorney Maria Santos was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately made me feel like someone was finally taking my situation seriously. "What your parents have done constitutes several different types of legal violations," Attorney Santos explained after reviewing the evidence Dylan and I had brought. "The inheritance theft is the most straightforward case since we have your grandmother's original will and documented proof that your parents knowingly violated the terms of equal distribution." She pulled out a legal pad and began making notes as she spoke. "The scholarship interference is more complex, but there are precedents for cases where parents have overstepped their authority in ways that damage their adult children's educational and financial opportunities." "What about the systematic sabotage of my work opportunities?" I asked, thinking about my father's plans to spread rumors about my reliability to prevent families from hiring me as a tutor. Attorney Santos nodded grimly. "If we can prove that your father has actually contacted your employers or potential employers to damage your reputation or employment prospects that could constitute intentional interference with economic relationships, which is actionable in civil court." She explained that my case had several strong elements: clear documentation of inheritance theft, evidence of educational sabotage, recorded proof of intentional economic interference, and testimony from educators who could speak to my actual capabilities and character in contrast to my father's false claims about my limitations. "The challenge," she continued, "is that pursuing legal action against your parents will likely destroy your family relationships permanently. Are you prepared for that level of conflict and potential estrangement?" I thought about my parents' calculating conversations about controlling my future, their casual dismissal of my grandmother's wishes, and their systematic efforts to ensure my dependence on their approval and financial support. They already destroyed our family relationship when they decided to treat me like a threat to be managed rather than a daughter to be supported. Attorney Santos scheduled a formal consultation for the following week, giving me time to gather additional evidence and consider the full implications of legal proceedings against my own parents. She also provided me with information about emergency educational loans and financial independence options that might help me pursue college even while legal issues were being resolved. That evening, Dylan and I met with Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Rodriguez to share what we had learned from the legal consultation. The teachers were both relieved that we had found professional help and concerned about the potential consequences of family legal battles. "There's something else we need to discuss," Mrs. Patterson said carefully. "I've been doing additional research into your family's financial situation, and there are some irregularities that might be relevant to your legal case." She showed us documents she had obtained through public records searches, revealing that my parents had taken out substantial loans using the inheritance money as collateral. The implications were staggering. Not only had they stolen my portion of Grandma Rose's money, but they had actually borrowed against the entire inheritance, meaning they now owed more than the original amount. According to these loan documents, Mrs. Patterson explained, "Your parents used the inheritance money to cover business debts and home improvements, then took out additional loans for Dylan's college fund, using the inheritance as collateral. They're currently in debt for approximately $40,000 more than your grandmother actually left." Mr. Rodriguez was shaking his head in disbelief. So they not only stole Greta's inheritance, but they've actually put Dylan's college fund at risk by over-borrowing against money that was supposed to be protected for educational purposes. Dylan looked stricken as he realized that his college fund, which he had already felt guilty about accepting, might not even exist anymore. "Are you saying that my college money is actually just debt that Mom and Dad took out in my name?" "Not in your name," Mrs. Patterson clarified, "but using money that was legally designated for your education as collateral for loans they used for other purposes. If they can't make the loan payments, the bank could seize assets that were supposed to fund your college education." The revelation added another layer of complexity to an already devastating situation. My parents hadn't just stolen from me. They had potentially jeopardized Dylan's future as well through irresponsible financial management and fraudulent use of inheritance funds. Attorney Santos was fascinated when I brought her the additional financial documentation during our second meeting. "This actually strengthens your case significantly," she explained. "Your parents not only violated the terms of your grandmother's will, but they've engaged in fraudulent misrepresentation of assets and potentially criminal misuse of funds designated for specific educational purposes." She reviewed the loan documents with the intensity of someone who had found a crucial piece of evidence. "The most important discovery here is that your parents signed loan agreements claiming the full inheritance amount was legally available for collateral, which means they lied to financial institutions about their ownership rights to money that was supposed to be distributed equally between both children." "What does that mean for Dylan's college fund?" I asked, genuinely concerned about my brother's future, despite everything our family had put me through. "It means that Dylan's education fund is essentially fictional at this point," Attorney Santos said bluntly. "Your parents have borrowed against money they didn't legally own and used those funds for purposes that violated both your grandmother's will and their fiduciary responsibility to both children." The legal consultation revealed that my parents' financial misconduct was far more extensive than simple favoritism or poor judgment. They had committed inheritance fraud, educational sabotage, intentional economic interference, and potentially criminal misuse of funds designated for their children's education. "We have grounds for both civil and criminal charges," Attorney Santos explained. "The civil case would focus on recovering your rightful inheritance, plus damages for the opportunities you lost due to their interference. The criminal case would involve the fraudulent loan applications and misrepresentation of asset ownership." She recommended starting with civil proceedings while documenting evidence that could support criminal charges if my parents refused to cooperate with restitution efforts. The process would be complex and emotionally challenging, but the evidence was strong enough to pursue full recovery of my inheritance, plus compensation for the educational and employment opportunities their sabotage had cost me. "There's one more thing," Attorney Santos said as we concluded our meeting. Given the systematic nature of your parents' interference with your educational and economic opportunities, we can request additional damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress and violation of your rights as an adult to pursue independent educational and career goals. For the first time since my devastating 18th birthday, I felt like someone with the authority and expertise to hold my parents accountable was taking my situation seriously and working to ensure justice would be served. Word of the legal proceedings spread through our small town faster than I expected, primarily because Attorney Santos had to serve official papers on my parents and contact various local businesses to investigate my father's interference with my employment opportunities. Within 2 weeks of filing the initial civil complaint, people throughout our community began approaching me with information and support that completely transformed my understanding of my family's reputation. The first revelation came from Janet Morrison, who owned the bakery next to Brewster's Corner. She stopped by during my afternoon shift to tell me that my father had indeed contacted several local businesses to discourage them from hiring me for part-time work. He told me you had behavioral problems and difficulty with authority figures. Janet explained, looking embarrassed about having believed his lies. He said you were unreliable and that hiring you would reflect poorly on any business owner who valued their reputation in the community. Sarah, my manager at the coffee shop, overheard our conversation and joined in with her own disturbing information. Your father called here 3 times trying to convince me to reduce your hours or find reasons to fire you. He said your work schedule was interfering with family responsibilities and causing problems at home. I felt sick realizing how extensively my father had worked to undermine my employment prospects, but I was also grateful that both business owners had ignored his interference and judged my work performance based on their own observations. More community members came forward over the following days. Mrs. Chen from the library mentioned that my father had requested that she limit my access to college preparation resources and discourage my participation in academic programs. The high school principal, Dr. Williams, revealed that my father had repeatedly contacted the school district, requesting that teachers stop encouraging my educational aspirations. Most shocking was the conversation I had with Tom Bradley, who owned the hardware store across town that competed with my father's business. Tom approached me after hearing about the legal proceedings from his wife, who taught at the elementary school where I tutored children. "I need to tell you something that might be helpful for your legal case," Tom said during a quiet moment in Brewster's Corner. "Your father has been spreading rumors about your family's financial situation and your mental health for months, trying to damage your reputation and employment prospects throughout the area." Tom explained that my father had been telling other business owners that I had psychological problems that made me unsuitable for customer service work, that my family was concerned about my emotional stability, and that employers should be cautious about hiring someone who might become a liability. "The thing is," Tom continued, "everyone who has actually interacted with you knows that his claims are completely false. You're one of the most responsible and mature young people in this town, and people have noticed the disparity between your father's stories and your actual behavior and character." The community support was overwhelming and completely unexpected. Local business owners began offering me additional work opportunities, specifically to counter my father's sabotage efforts. The families I tutored for wrote letters to Attorney Santos documenting my reliability, patience, and positive influence on their children's academic progress. Teachers from both the high school and elementary school submitted statements describing my character, work ethic, and academic achievements. Dr. Williams scheduled a meeting with me to discuss something that would prove crucial to my legal case. "I want you to know that our school district has been documenting your father's inappropriate interference with your educational opportunities," she explained. "We have records of every phone call, email, and meeting where he attempted to limit your access to college preparation resources or prevent teachers from encouraging your academic pursuits." She showed me a file containing months of documentation about my father's contacts with school personnel, including his requests that guidance counselors discourage me from applying to competitive colleges, his demands that teachers avoid giving me information about scholarship opportunities, and his insistence that educators support the family's plan for me to work at their hardware store instead of pursuing higher education. What your father has been doing violates several educational policies designed to protect students' rights to academic support and college preparation. Dr. Williams continued. We've been building documentation because his interference was so unusual and inappropriate that we wanted to ensure we had evidence if legal issues ever arose. The school district's records provided additional evidence of my father's systematic efforts to sabotage my educational opportunities, including documentation of his false claims about my mental health and academic capabilities that contradicted my actual performance and teacher evaluations. Most importantly, the community response demonstrated that people who actually knew me rejected my father's narratives about my limitations and character flaws. My work references were consistently excellent, my academic performance had remained strong despite family stress, and my interactions with community members reflected maturity and responsibility, rather than the behavioral problems my father had claimed I exhibited. The public nature of the legal proceedings also revealed information about my family's business practices that further damaged their credibility and community standing. Several customers of Dad's hardware store came forward to describe questionable billing practices, poor customer service, and business relationships that suggested a pattern of dishonesty and manipulation beyond what they had done to me. Attorney Santos was pleased with the community documentation and support, explaining that the evidence painted a clear picture of systematic sabotage and character assassination that went far beyond normal parental concerns about a child's future plans. Your father's behavior has been so extreme and inappropriate that community members who have no involvement in your family conflicts have noticed and documented his interference with your opportunities, she explained. This kind of third-party validation significantly strengthens our case for both financial restitution and additional damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress. The community support also led to practical assistance that helped me navigate the challenges of pursuing legal action while maintaining my work schedule and completing my senior year. Local business owners offered flexible scheduling for my part-time jobs, families I tutored for provided character references, and educators continued offering after-hours support for college applications that couldn't be sabotaged. Most surprisingly, the public attention resulted in new scholarship opportunities from organizations that had heard about my situation through local news coverage. A regional foundation that supported students overcoming family educational sabotage contacted Attorney Santos to offer a scholarship specifically designed for situations like mine, and several local businesses established a fund to help cover my legal expenses and college preparation costs. The community response transformed what had started as a private family conflict into a public demonstration of support for educational opportunity and opposition to parental sabotage of children's academic aspirations. 6 months later, I stood in the courthouse lobby holding a settlement check that represented not just financial restitution, but validation that my parents' systematic sabotage of my opportunities was legally and morally wrong. The civil proceedings had resulted in full recovery of my rightful inheritance, plus additional damages for educational interference, emotional distress, and economic sabotage totaling $68,000. Attorney Santos had negotiated a comprehensive settlement that required my parents to pay immediate restitution for the misappropriated inheritance funds, cover all my legal expenses, and provide additional compensation for the scholarship opportunities their interference had cost me. The settlement also included provisions preventing them from contacting my current or future employers, educational institutions, or scholarship organizations without my explicit written consent. The most important aspect of this settlement, Attorney Santos explained as we reviewed the final documents is that it establishes your complete financial independence and legal protection from future interference with your educational and career pursuits. Dylan had chosen to refuse his college fund once he learned that the money was actually debt secured against stolen inheritance funds. Instead, he applied for his own scholarships and financial aid, determined to pursue his education through his own merit, rather than benefiting from our parents' financial misconduct. His decision to support my legal case and refuse the fraudulent college fund had earned him respect from college admissions committees, who valued his integrity and independence. "I never wanted money that was stolen from my sister," Dylan said during his testimony for the settlement proceedings. "I want to succeed based on my own efforts and achievements, not because my parents chose to invest in me while sabotaging someone else's opportunities." The settlement funds allowed me to enroll in the State University's honors program, with a double major in visual arts and creative writing, exactly the kind of educational path my parents had claimed was unrealistic and financially irresponsible. The scholarship opportunities that had been recovered through legal proceedings covered additional educational expenses, including study abroad programs and graduate school preparation. More importantly, the legal proceedings had forced my parents to confront the extent of their manipulation and control, leading to family counseling sessions where they slowly began acknowledging the damage their favoritism and sabotage had caused both Dylan and me. "We thought we were protecting you from disappointment and unrealistic expectations," Mom said during one of our supervised counseling sessions. "We genuinely believed that encouraging your artistic interests would set you up for financial failure and emotional devastation." Dad's admission was more difficult for him, but ultimately more honest about his motivations. "I was threatened by your independence and creativity because they reminded me of dreams I gave up when I took over my father's business. I convinced myself that limiting your opportunities was protecting you, but I was really trying to ensure you would need the family business the same way I felt trapped by it." The counseling process revealed that my parents' sabotage had been motivated by their own fears about inadequacy, financial insecurity, and loss of control, rather than genuine concerns about my capabilities or future prospects. Their systematic interference with my opportunities had been their way of ensuring that both Dylan and I would remain dependent on their approval and financial support. "Learning about the extent of your father's sabotage efforts has been shocking for me as well," Mom admitted. "I supported decisions that I thought were about realistic planning, but I didn't realize how systematically he was working to undermine your confidence and opportunities." The family therapy sessions provided a structured environment for addressing years of damage, while establishing boundaries that would allow for potential relationship rebuilding based on mutual respect rather than manipulation and control. 6 months after starting college, I received an invitation to display my artwork in the university's annual student exhibition, with 3 of my pieces selected for the show that would be attended by gallery owners and art critics from across the region. The recognition felt like validation not just of my artistic abilities, but of my decision to pursue my passions despite my family's initial lack of support. Dylan and I had developed a strong sibling relationship built on honesty and mutual support, rather than the competition and guilt that had characterized our interactions when we were both trapped in our parents' manipulative family dynamic. He visited me at college regularly, and we often discussed our shared experiences of growing up in a household where love and support were contingent on conforming to predetermined roles and expectations. "I'm proud of you for fighting back and refusing to accept their limitations," Dylan told me during one of his visits. "Watching you stand up for yourself taught me that I didn't have to accept their control over my future either." Most significantly, I had established a scholarship fund through the university specifically designed to support students whose families had sabotaged their educational opportunities. The fund provided both financial assistance and legal resources for students facing parental interference with their academic pursuits, transforming my painful experiences into a source of hope and practical help for others. The fund received donations from community members who had witnessed my family's situation, educators who had encountered similar cases of parental educational sabotage, and legal professionals who wanted to support students' rights to pursue their academic goals without family interference. Your willingness to fight for your rights and share your story has inspired other students to recognize that family sabotage of educational opportunities is not acceptable and doesn't have to be tolerated. Dr. Williams told me during a scholarship fund event at the high school. As I prepared for my college graduation 2 years later, I reflected on the journey from that devastating 18th birthday conversation to becoming a confident young woman with a clear sense of her own worth and capabilities. The legal battle had been emotionally exhausting, but it had also taught me that standing up for myself was not selfish or disrespectful, but necessary for protecting my right to pursue my dreams and build a life based on my own values and aspirations. My parents and I maintained a cordial relationship with carefully established boundaries that protected my independence while allowing for family connections that were based on mutual respect rather than manipulation and control. They attended my college graduation and expressed genuine pride in my achievements, acknowledging that their initial lack of faith in my potential had been wrong and harmful. "We're sorry that we didn't believe in you from the beginning," Dad said after my graduation ceremony. "Watching you succeed despite our interference has taught us that our job as parents should have been to support your dreams, not limit them based on our own fears and insecurities. The experience taught me that family love should encourage growth and independence, rather than demanding conformity and dependence. True support means believing in someone's potential and helping them develop their talents, even when their path looks different from what you might have chosen for them. Most importantly, I learned that my worth and potential were not determined by my family's initial assessment of my capabilities, but by my own willingness to work hard, pursue my passions, and refuse to accept limitations imposed by people who were more concerned with control than with my happiness and success. Today, as I prepare to start graduate school with a fellowship in creative writing, I know that the most valuable lesson from my family's betrayal was learning to believe in myself enough to fight for my dreams and refuse to accept other people's limitations as the definition of my possibilities. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who didn't believe in your dreams or tried to control your future? How did you find the courage to pursue your goals, despite their lack of support? Please share your story in the comments below. Like this video if my journey inspired you. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges, and share this with someone who needs to hear that their dreams are worth fighting for. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that your potential is not limited by other people's fears or expectations. Remember that sometimes the most important battles we fight are for the right to become who we're meant to be.